Today in the class we are going to discuss about the parallel operation of an alternator. What is the alternator? Alternator is an electromechanical device is convert the mechanical energy to electrical energy. The alternator is produce the electrical energy. They are used in power plant for produce electric energy. The alternator is really an AC generator. Alternator is really an AC generator in alternator, and EMF is induced in the stator. The EMF is induced in the stator of alternator with the influence of rotating magnetic field due to Faraday's law. According to Faraday's law, the rotating magnetic field produced in the stator law of induction due to the synchronous speed of rotation of field pole. It is also known as the synchronous generator. The alternator can also say the synchronous generator because there the field is produced synchronous speed. When the AC power system are interconnected, when the AC when the AC power system are interconnected for efficiency, the alternator should also have to be connected in parallel. When AC system or AC power system are interconnected to each other, then this time the alternator also connected in parallel. There will be the more than two alternator connected in parallel in generating station. In a generating station, two alternator are connected in parallel. The some condition will follow for the connected the parallel alternator. The condition for parallel operation of alternator. There are some conditions to be satisfied for the parallel operation of the alternator. Before entering that, we should understood the some term which are as follows. For for connection, the parallel operation of alternator, the some procedure or some term will follow. Number one, the process of connecting two alternator or an alternator and an infinite busbar system in parallel is known as the synchronizing. The process of connecting to alternator or an alternator and an connected to infinite busbar system in parallel. This system is known as the synchronizing. The running machine is the machine which carry the load. Running machine means this which those machine there are carry the load. Next is the incoming machine is the alternator or the machine which has to be connected in parallel with the system. The incoming machine is the alternator or the machine which has to be connected parallel to the busbar system or to the infinite busbar. For connecting the alternator in parallel, the some condition there should the some condition to be satisfied are the phase sequence of the incoming machine the phase sequence of the incoming machine voltage and the busbar voltage should be identical. The phase sequence of the incoming machine means alternator voltage and the busbar voltage should be the identical. Here the alternator voltage and busbar voltage should be same. Second is the RMS line voltage of the busbar. RMS line voltage of the busbar or already running machine and the incoming machine should be the same. Here the RMS voltage of busbar system and the alternator RMS voltage should be the same. Third point is the phase angle. The phase angle of the two systems should be parallel. The phase angle The phase angle of the two systems should be parallel. Here the two systems are alternator and infinite bus bar. Their phase sequence should be same. Next is the frequency of two terminal voltage. The frequency of the two terminal voltage, the incoming machine and the bus bar should be nearly the same. The frequency of the two terminal voltage, the two terminal means the incoming machine or alternator and the bus bar, the should be nearly same. The large power transient, the large power transient will occur when the frequency are not nearly equal. When the uh, frequency of the two terminal voltage are not same, then this time the large transient will occur when the frequency are not nearly equal or not nearly same. Next is the following point are to be considered while the carrying out the maintenance on alternator. This portion will see the maintenance of alternator. Before the starting any maintenance or work on the alternator, the all safety precautions should be taken. Before the starting the maintenance of any electrical machine or any electrical machine or alternator, at first safety precautions should be taken. And the alternator should be shut down. The alternator should be shut down. Also post the notice the ply cut on relevant place, and the alternator near to be isolated. Also post the notice or ply cut on there on the right. The machine is shut down, even this poster will attach to the any relevant place or the on the alternator relevant place or on the alternator. The alternator is, should be isolated. After the isolated the alternator, then we will start the maintenance of alternator. The some point are here noted, and that the for the clearance for the maintenance of alternator. First point is clean the alternator ventilation, the passage and air filter. First point is clean the alternator ventilation passage and the air filter. The air filter or ventilation are provided to the alternator for for the heat providing in the atmosphere when the alternator increase their temperature. Next is check the insulation resistance of the stator or rotor winding. Next is check the insulation resistance of the stator and rotor winding. The stator and rotor winding insulation checked by the measure the air gap between the stator and rotor. The air gap between stator and rotor to be maintained. Their air gap between stator and rotor is 1.5 to 2 mm. There should be we follow the air gap between the stator and rotor is 1.5 to 2 mm. Next is slip ring to be checked for even wide down to be renewed if required. Next is carbon brush. The carbon brush to be clean and the checked for the free movement. Carbon brush are provided to the alternator for the collecting the electric power. The carbon brush to be clean and the checked for the free movement. Next is three the brass contact pressure to be checked by the spring balance. The bras are attached to the spring, and then this time pressure to be checked by the spring balance. Next is automatic voltage regulator. The automatic voltage regulator to be checked and clean of oil and dust. The automatic voltage regulator to be checked and cleaned of oil and dust. The lube oil level of pedestal bearing to the maintenance and the renewed as per the planet maintenance. The lube oil are provided to the bearing for the moving, no, for the free moving and the bearing. Then this time this time should the check the oil level of bearing. See, next is a vacuum cleaner can be used. The vacuum cleaner can be used to remove the dust accumulated in the inner part of alternator. Dust are accumulated in the alternator, then this time we can use the vacuum for the removing a dust. Next is terminal box. Terminal box cover the gasket to be checked for the proper oil and water tightness. The terminal box are provided on the alternator. This terminal box is very tight. No, there is no enter the any water and oil. The next is all the connection in the terminal box to be tight and properly. All the connection in the terminal box to be tight and properly. The output of the alternator, their connection is very tight. The cable gland to be checked for the integrity. The force ventilation around the alternator must be maintained all the time. Next is the check the heater for the proper operation. Next is the foundation bolt of the alternator to be checked for the tightness. The the foundation bolt of the alternator to be checked for the tightness. The alternator are placed on the foundation and their bolt is very tight. After the maintenance, after the maintenance is performed, a no load test should be carried out, and general conditions such as noise, temperature, voltage generated, etc. of the alternator should be observed and tested. This is the maintenance point of the alternator. Next is brake test on a DC series motor. A DC machine can tested by three different methods. A DC machine can be tested by three different method. Number one is the direct method, second is indirect method, and third is a regenerative method. Direct method testing of DC machine, also known as the brake test. The brake test method is suitable for a small DC machine, such as a DC shunt motor, DC series motor. In direct method, the DC machine is subjected to rated load and the output power is state. The ratio of output power to the input power. The ratio of output power to the input power give the efficiency of DC machine. The ratio of output power to input power give the efficiency of the DC machine. For a DC generator, the output power is stated in register. The direct method of testing when the contact on a motor is also known as the brake test. Direct method direct method of testing also known as the brake test. Contact the motor, contact the DC series motor. The brake test of DC motor is carried out as a shown in figure. This is the figure of brake test of DC motor. It is the pulley of a DC series motor. It is the radius is a balance weight S2. Here the S1 is balance weight is connected to the pulley by the spring. The connect the spring. It is the rotor shaft. Total is called the pulley. It is the rotor shaft. It is pulley. It is the pulley radius. It is the two wheel hand removal wheel H1 and H2. A belt around the air cooled pulley has two end attached to the spring balance. It is the belt total. It is a belt, the air cooled belt. It is attached to the spring, attached to the spring balance. The spring balance is S1 and S2. The spring balance is S1 and S2. Using the belt tight and the hand wheel H1 and H2. The hand wheel is H1 and H2. H1 and H2. The load of the motor is adjusted to its rated value. Assuming the spring balance to be calibrated in kilogram, we'll see the reading in the unit is kilogram. Here the reading in kilogram. The rated load on the DC motor is given as the motor output power. We know that the formula of motor output power, torque into angular speed, and torque into angular speed. We know that the torque is equal to force into distance. Here the force F1 and F2 are here. The pulley radius is equal to the distance. As the torque because of force F1 and F2 are opposed to each other. The force the opposed the F1 F2 are opposed to each other. Therefore, the net torque will be here the two force F1 and F2 and the two force opposed to each other. Therefore, the net torque will be subtraction between F1 minus F2. Then the motor output power omega is into S1 minus S2 into R and 9.8 watt. Here the omega is angular speed. Here the two force the opposite to each other. Then the subtraction between the two force, R is radius and 9.8 is acceleration gravity. Now assuming the terminal voltage. Now assuming the terminal voltage of DC motor. Assuming the terminal voltage of DC motor to be V suffix T and I suffix L to be the load current. The DC motor to be the terminal voltage and load current to be the load current. Then the power input to the DC motor. The power input to the DC motor terminal voltage into load current. Thus, the efficiency of the DC motor can be calculated as the efficiency equal to, we know that the output power to the input power. The efficiency is the ratio of output power to input power. Here we can write the equation of output power omega into S1 minus S2 into R into 9.8. The input power is called terminal voltage into load current. It is the efficiency formula of brake test DC motor. For conducting the brake test on DC series motor, it must be ensured that the belt is sufficiently tight before the motor is switched on to the pulley as a DC. The series motor shall not be started at no load. A series motor we cannot start before the load. At first, we'll take the load on the DC motor after the switch on. The disadvantage of brake test. The spring balance reading are not stable. The spring balance reading are not stable. Rather, it fluctuate. The spring balance reading are not stable. Rather, it fluctuate. The spring balance the reading is provided. This reading is not stable or not stable. Rather, it is the reading is fluctuate. Second is the output power is state. The output power is state. During the brake test time, the DC series motor the provide the output power. This power is totally hosted. The frictional torque at a particular the frictional torque at a particular setting the frictional torque at a particular setting of hand wheel H1 and H2 do not remain constant.